As Dominique said, my name is Anthony Nell. I currently serve as a graduate residence director here at Mississippi State University. Thank you all for coming. I'm really excited to talk a little bit about our residential curriculum and the process that we've taken to put that into place and the process we're still going through to improve and make sure that we are educating our residents as best as we can. As Dominique said, unfortunately, Isaac had a family emergency. He is unable to present with me today, but I have invited Stephanie Hill-Skurlak to join me today. After Isaac, she's probably the most well-versed in our residential curriculum, and so I'll let her give a small introduction as well.
Good morning, SEAHO. My name is Stephanie Hill-Skurlak. I use she, series pronouns, and I am a community director at Mississippi State University. Like Anthony said, our entire department has worked really hard over the past year to kind of set this new culture as we've moved from a programming model to educating residents through a residential curriculum. So I'm excited to step in. I wish that you all could hear this from Isaac because he is our resident expert, but I will do my best to do him justice this morning along with Anthony. So let us know if you have any questions. We'll monitor the chat box as we go through and we'll leave plenty of time at the end. But with that, I will turn it over to Anthony to move me to the next slide. All right, friends. So like I mentioned, we're here today to talk about how we've moved to a residence education model on our campus. So we are here today in hopes to define and review the co-curricular approach for student learning within our residential context here at Mississippi State. Today we're going to discuss some key components for student interaction and how we progress through the residential curriculum and how we would encourage others to look at that progression. And lastly, we would love to present you all with some opportunities for assessment and evaluation with this model. We are going to show you how we have began to assess and evaluate this model in hopes that you all can utilize it at your own institutions.
Before we get into what we're currently doing, I do want to give some context to what we used to do before moving to the curricular model. So before we had a programmatic model, which incorporated two different kind of areas. The first is the programming component, which was the DOG model, which included just general themes of the types of programs we wanted our resident advisors to implement within the residence halls, on their wings, or within their buildings. And so those categories were diversity and inclusion, academics, wellness, and gaining life skills. And so that was the programmatic component. We also had an intentional interaction model, which relied on resident advisors having 2 intentional interactions in the fall and 1 intentional interaction in the spring. These incorporated conversations with specific types of information that we wanted to get them to talk to their residents about, and then they would report those intentional interactions to us so we could review them and help us get a better idea of what our residents were going through within our residence halls. However, we did partner with our Office of Institutional Effectiveness to go through over 2,000 intentional interaction responses, and we didn't really get anything. We did not get a lot of information that provided us with a lot of guidelines on how we should be connecting with our residents and educating them and helping them gain those important skills outside of the classroom. And so we realized, this current programmatic model was not doing the job that we wanted to do. And with our new executive director, Dee Allard, who started a few years ago, we really wanted to start implementing a curricular approach to really get at the nitty-gritty of what we wanted our residents to learn while they lived with us on campus. And I'll pass it next to Stephanie. So we're no longer doing that. We're going to get into what we're doing now shortly.
So as we began to move from this programming model to more of a residence education model through a curriculum, we leaned a lot on the people who come before us. We leaned a lot on theories and ideas and practices of people who have done this and done this well. We worked a lot. PGB has been definitely the person we've referred to the most. So developing a co-curricular learning model, residential curriculum and curricular approaches in student affairs and residence life work. We refer to this as Brown 2020. It is in our day-to-day language at this point. Our colleagues know what we're talking about when we refer to Brown 2020. It's been interesting over the past year how this and the term unprecedented times have really been key in our vocabulary as we worked through a pandemic to institute a curriculum. We also leaned a lot on these other good reads you see here. So we have About Campus, Beyond Seat Time and Student Satisfaction, A Curricular Approach to Residence Education, and that was in 2006 by Kerr and Tweedy. We used Shifting to Curricular Approaches to Learning Beyond the Classroom. Kerr again came back in 2017 and left us with some more great information on co-curricular approaches to learning. Leaned a lot on the sense of belonging. You'll see that come up in a couple of slides here, how that fits into our model. Baxter-Magola's theory of self-authorship comes up a lot when we were making our learning outcomes. And then social influence theory did come up quite a bit as we were looking to make our overall diagram, which you'll see in a couple of slides, and how social influences on college students, particularly students who live in residence halls, can affect the learning that happens there. This is obviously not an exhaustive list. We do have quite a big list. If you're looking for those, we will talk more at the end about how to contact us for more information, but we definitely have a pretty big list of reads that we can give to you all. But these were what set the foundation for our curriculum. We wanted to make sure that we were rooting our curriculum in education and in theory. And we have definitely recognized the complexity of the curriculum philosophy. And we've worked to consolidate as much as we can to make it something to where the students can really understand what we're doing here. And we'll talk more about that in a minute as well.
So before we get into the specifics of our residential curriculum, I do want to touch a little bit on the differences between the traditional approach and the curricular approach. We've kind of been throwing around those terms a lot since the beginning of this presentation. We just want to kind of define what we mean by that. So the traditional approach is kind of that traditional list of general topics or categories that we want students to be exposed to, kind of like how we used to have the dog model with those specific categories. And the student leaders, the resident advisors, resident assistants, whatever they're called at your institution, are in complete control of kind of how they're implementing those events or programs, as well as like the topics of those programs. And those events are kind of standalone, they're disconnected, they don't really provide any flow or specific sequence in which we want those residents to learn. This traditional approach typically causes a lot of burnout in our students within our resident advisors because they're kind of, there's no regular flow, no understanding, kind of a lack of guidance on how to implement these really educational topics and programs. And we don't want that to happen to our resident advisors because we know they do a lot, and programming should be an important part of what they do, but we don't want that to be the reason that they're getting burnt out. And so moving towards the curricular approach really includes a really clearly defined focus on the specific goals that we want our residents to learn while they stay with us. And those goals are specifically tied and related to the institutional and departmental mission of the institution, to make sure that those residents are really learning what we want them to learn, and that learning is supported by the institutional mission and vision. So lesson plans help facilitate those kinds of things that are happening within our residence halls. Professional staff get to provide a little bit more structure that guides those student leaders in our residence halls, those student staff members, to make sure they have some guidance on what they're needing to be doing, to make sure that the content and the pedagogy of those programmings and events are really best serving the residents within our buildings, to make sure they're truly learning and taking away information from their experiences while living with us, not necessarily just, you know, going to get pizza after classes or stopping by to pick up something or plant a seed. While we love those programs and they're great for building community, they don't necessarily get at the educational components that we really want our students to learn in conjunction with the information that they're learning inside of the classroom. And so Mississippi State, we really want to make sure we're utilizing residential curriculum correctly. Before, we might have called the dog model a residential curriculum, and we might have called our programmatic model, we might have said that was our curriculum, but it wasn't really a true curricular approach because we didn't have clearly defined goals that we wanted our residents to learn. And so moving forward, we'll get into what our goals are. And so this is what Paul Gordon Brown calls the cascade. It's kind of starting with our priority and moving down to our individual outcomes. So at Mississippi State, we have 3 learning goals under our educational priority. The educational priority really describes kind of what the main goal of the entire curriculum is. So here at Mississippi State, we want our curriculum to embody the university and the divisional strategic plan by cultivating inclusive residential communities, establishing personal responsibility, and creating foundations that really allow our residents to lead and serve in a diverse society. And so that is our priority, which really leads very well into our specific learning goals. Our learning goals are inclusive residential communities. And so this kind of holds a lot of our components of diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is what really supports our students and helps them participate in civic engagement and really finding that belonging within their community, because we have every student is different, and we want to make sure that they can feel accepted in their community, because it's hard to implement educational events or really help students to find their place within their residence hall if the residence hall is not inclusive. And so we really want to make sure that's one of our learning goals, to help improve the inclusivity of where our residents are living. Our second learning goal is personal responsibility. So this really focuses on the holistic well-being of our students, and really helping them learn those specific goals and skills that they need to be successful human beings, successful adults, as they are sort of entering the world for the first time out under the wings of their parents. We want to make sure they're learning and developing as people to ensure that they can take care of themselves when they graduate. And finally, our third learning goal is global citizenship, which really helps to enhance the opportunities our students have for leadership, campus engagement, and self-reflection to promote lifelong learning, because we really want them to be able to participate in society that has a diversity in terms of people, experiences, everything. We want to make sure that we're addressing their global citizenship and exposing them to the world and the opportunities that they have to participate.
So under these 3 learning goals, we do have 19 learning outcomes. I recognize that this slide is not the most engaging and definitely has the most writing, but I felt that it was important for us to really get down to what these learning outcomes encompass, or what these learning goals encompass, I should say. So like Anthony mentioned, it's inclusive residential communities, personal responsibility, and global citizenship. And these pieces, these bullet points, are what we're aiming to hit when we have an educational event. So when we think about inclusive residential communities, we think of engaging conversations about identity, needs, and beliefs. This idea of civil discourse has come up a lot in the past year. So we wanted to make sure that that was something that we had our focus on, had our finger on throughout planning educational events for our residents. We recognize the importance of helping our students figure out what implicit bias is and how to recognize their own implicit bias. And we want them to be able to identify systemically marginalized identities and feel like they can support those in tangible ways. We want them to engage in activities that aid in the development of their personal worldviews. We recognize that when students come to us as freshmen, quite a few of them hold those same beliefs as their parents because that's all they've ever known. So we want to help them identify, are those your values and your beliefs, or is it something else? Is it time to break free from those beliefs that you think you've held to be authentic? We want them to be able to identify personal ethics and decision-making processes. We want them to be able to make decisions without having to call home all the time. We want them to feel empowered to make those decisions that they need to make for themselves. Interacting and connecting with residents during residential programs, they can't do these things without being surrounded by their peers. So you'll see that come up over and over again. And then lastly, inclusive residential communities does include positively contributing to their residential and university communities. The next one is personal responsibility. So this is the self, right? The first one is the community, this one is self. We want them to be able to integrate strategies for making an academic transition. A lot of our students come from poorly funded high schools. So being able to transition into the course load at Mississippi State, we recognize that we have a great opportunity to help them make that academic transition. Learning strategies to promote effective study skills, same thing. A lot of our students will tell you, I never had to study in high school, and now I don't know how to study. So some of those first opportunities for us to engage with them in educational moments are helping them figure out what they need to do to be successful academically. We want them to engage with their campus partners and their academic resources and take ownership of their actions in achieving their academic goals. We have a pretty strong partnership with some of our academic partners, particularly the Pathfinder program, which I don't think we'll touch on much in this presentation, but we would love to talk to you more about what that looks like if you're interested in it. But we recognize that we're not the content experts on academics, so we want students to be able to utilize their campus partners. We want them to learn strategies to practice positive physical, financial, and emotional, and incorporate risk reduction strategies to promote healthy behavior related to alcohol, drugs, and sex-related behavior. So really here, the education is important. We don't expect students not to participate in these behaviors, but we want them to reduce risk as much as possible and move into these with the education and the knowledge behind it to make informed decisions. And lastly, global citizenship. So this is the greater society, right? We want students to engage in living learning communities. We want them to find programs and things that align with their career aspirations. We want them to apply curricular and co-curricular experiences and goal attainment and articulate the utility of their major. We recognize that students will change their major 4 or 5 times. I myself changed my major quite a bit, right? That's not a sentiment lost on me. But being able to figure out what you've learned and what you enjoy and those areas of expertise you have and how those can fit into a career down the road. We want them to apply learning to life after college and interact with campus organizations. So for us, having our students be involved, that involvement theory comes back into play here. We recognize that students who are involved are more likely to persist. And then lastly, it wouldn't be residence life without a good hall council. So serve and participate in their hall council to promote residential advocacy and change, or participate in those events. It is important to us that they are engaging with the, we call it core here, but that is the first piece for us on how we can teach them to advocate for the needs of the hall. So this is the prettier picture, if you will. This is the diagram that comes together to reflect the overall college experience for us here. We know it as the residential experience as a student moves throughout college. So as you can see, the intersections of these learning goals is symbolic of the theory of intersectionality and a resident's attainment to sense of belonging and self-authorship in light of moving away from those external authorities, i.e. who they grew up with, presented by home, local, peer, university pressures, things like that. So you can see here that all of our learning outcome, or our learning goals, 1, 2, and 3, are in here. So personal responsibility, global citizenship, inclusive residential communities come together and they intersect with each other. So the idea of personal responsibility and global citizenship connecting to provide students with ideas for authorship and moving through that theory of self-authorship, global citizenship and inclusive residential communities coming together in that residential curriculum model. Both of them have a lot of social influence on them. And then the idea of personal responsibility and inclusive residential communities coming together to create that sense of belonging for students. We use this a lot with our, it's a pretty picture. We can take some of these things away. I normally take the ideas of authorship and belonging away until I know that they understand those theories. But this has been a really powerful tool for us to create that picture of what we're trying to get at here. So you can see that the focuses are on a lot of different things, but ultimately it's self and then community and then greater society. We recognize that people can move back and forth through that, and our educational events have proven that it's totally possible to move back and forth through these three learning goals in order to create this holistic education experience for our residents. So where does it start? How do we start with understanding resident needs? It started for us with Hello Health State. This was an assessment, a questionnaire. We wanted to understand the base interest, hope, and concern of our incoming students and our returning students who chose to live with us again. So we designed a Hello Health State as an assessment tool with just a few questions on it. So we wanted to know what their hobbies or interests were that they hoped to continue to build upon once they got to college. So what were those things that they had enjoyed up until now that they wanted to continue to enjoy when they got here with us at State? What were some of their concerns or fears that they had about coming to college, returning to college, and living in a residence hall? And then what were some things that they hoped to gain from their time living with us? This could have been personally, academically, professionally, anything like that. So those were the main questions that we asked. Over here on your right side, you can see kind of the beginning of what that assessment looked like. It was an online assessment, and it was a great idea, right? We aim to distribute this questionnaire through departmental marketing streams. We wanted to make it a part of our move-in. That didn't happen. We failed to make the questionnaire part of the move-in, and that severely limited our student feedback. So we got right under 500 responses. We had 491 responses to the survey, which was not what we were looking for, but was still valuable. We distributed those 491 responses to the hall directors. And the goal for that was to influence the social and the educational programs. Some halls definitely had more responses than others. I can only speak for my own community. I unfortunately didn't have a single person complete this assessment, and that was okay. We had already had it in planned other ways to gain this information from our residents, but we do plan on continuing to do this and hopefully figuring out a way to get more responses in the future, because this was a powerful tool for the people who received those responses.
So with the feedback from Hello Health State, we're able to move into some of the other implementation strategies that we use to implement our residential curriculum. Those implementation strategies include sociograms, residents of interest, social programming, and educational events. I'm just going to go over each one of those here. So sociograms, there's kind of an example on your right of what a sociogram is. It's basically a tool for student staff members to kind of show the interactions, the observations that they have of their residents, as well as store some characteristics or trends of their wing and across their community. And so it allows them to kind of store things that utilizes like a key. We'll go into some more details about sociograms in the following slides. After sociograms, we have residents of interest. Residents of interest are kind of what are replacing the specificity of the intentional interaction model we had before. But instead of every resident, every RA having to talk to all of their residents, we are more intentional about assigning residents of interest. And so they're given to RAs to do, and the resident is someone who could have some behavioral issues or concerns that we want to address. They're used to identify residents who might need some extra help or extra assistance. We really want to make sure that we're able to address those residents and address some concerning behaviors, whether it's mental health, missing classes, if they have some conduct violations, or if it's a resident we just don't know a lot about. We can assign those residents of interest to RA so they can complete those forms so we can have some more information and help guide the RAs and other student staff members to really address the needs of specific residents. While we have talked about our curricular model a lot, we do still have social programming that does take up a bulk of our RA's programming time, because we do want our RAs to build relationships and build rapport with their residents. And so we use social programming to do that. So RAs are still required to do social programming, and we really help to guide them, make sure that they're using those social programs to identify information, notice trends, and observe their residents and interactions on their floor so they can put that information into their sociograms. So these social programs are really aimed to be more casual, more simple, really cater to the wants and needs of the residents to make sure that they come out and have some fun, because we do want our residence halls to be a place where residents can have fun and really experience what it means to live on campus at Mississippi State. But the educational events are the final kind of piece of our curricular approach in terms of implementation. And that is, they're designed to address the specific needs and concerns of the community. And so we use the sociograms to try and identify trends in the deficits of knowledge and skills in our residents, so that supervisors, mainly hall directors, are able to have a little bit more in the implementation of those educational events, because we are the people who have the master's degrees. We are the people who are either who are getting master's degrees, who really care about student affairs and have an understanding of what it means to support and educate students outside of the classroom, because most of our resident advisors aren't pursuing careers in student affairs. So we don't want to give them tasks that could be better done by someone who is in student affairs. And so educational events are the major educational component of the curriculum. And so hall directors will use those trends and characteristics to determine, what types of programming we should do. And that really helps to take some of the load off of our resident advisors and really help to make sure that our residents are learning while they're living with us. So because sociograms are such a large component of a large tool that we use, this is a closer look at one of a sociogram. So this is actually one of Isaac's RA sociograms. And so it holds a lot of information and it really allows resident advisors to store information in an organized way, in a visual way, that really suits them. So while all sociograms generally have a section per resident and we have some common key symbols that we use across campus, there is a lot of guidelines for differentiation by supervisor. Some supervisors ask for pictures, some ask for more words. In my community, I ask my RAs to use emojis. Because I think emojis are a really common symbol and they're used to using emojis to convey information, whether it's in texting or sometimes email. It's really helpful to give them guidance on how to create those sociograms, because RAs and supervisors can use sociograms to cater information, cater programming to the needs of the residents. So some sociogram documents even include additional pages. So in my community, we have an additional page and I call it a resident tracker. So it's more of just a list of residents in a chart form, and student staff members can add columns. They can have things for programming attendance. They can have a column for the last interaction that they had with their residents. So they can sort by last interaction and they can see who they haven't seen in a while. So really helping them store information, and it's really good assessment data. So we can see kind of how our residents are interacting on their floors, how our residents are experiencing things, what they're involved in, what they're not involved in, and really helping to get them connected either to their RA, to fellow residents who have common interests, and really helping resident advisors use the sociogram as a tool in their community building. And then having supervisors use sociograms as a tool in determining what types of educational events would best suit those populations, because our residence halls all have different populations in them with different needs. And so we want to make sure that we are addressing the needs of our specific residents and not doing a really general topic that might not be as helpful as something more specific.
So those of you who have experienced or have seen a residential curriculum have probably seen the idea of a lesson plan. In my experience working with curriculum, that was the first thing I thought of as a student, was like, oh, these are the lesson plans I follow. So we do have a lesson plan. We use it primarily for our educational events. So these educational events are the things that are designed to address the needs and concerns of the community. So the wing, the floor, the building, the community, which would be a group of 2 buildings. But it's designed to address those needs through the development of a lesson plan, which is what you see on your right. And that just outlines the method that we will provide this educational learning moment to the community, really. It's more than a traditional program for us. It encompasses campus collaboration, community dialogue, projects, services, anything of the sort. But it's used for educational events. We want to articulate the targeted audience, apply the learning outcomes that we spent some time talking to you all about earlier, identify the purpose, the implementation strategy, and any of those things. So these are data-driven and framed in ways that can achieve our learning goals. So it was important to us to have an assessment strategy. So over here on the right, you can see we want people to check the learning goal that applies here, 1 or more. Check the audience. So is it a wing, a floor, a building, a community, a campus overall, a student staff member? Implementation strategy. This could be health and safety checks, warm body counts, one-on-one conversations, anything like that that's an admin task that they do. Hall community engagement models, via social media, sort of passive program, campus engagement in general, things like that. There's a box for facilitators. So are the RAs facilitating? Is it the graduate residence director or the professional community director? Is it the Residence Hall Association, NRHH, REA? Is it the Hall Council, which we call CORE once again? Are we using campus partners to help us facilitate? The most common answer is yes. And is an academic department on this program? We ask for the event information, the title of the event, how much money it is, inside, outside, things like that, just that's basic things. There's a spot for facilitation guide. That's where the bulk of it is. That's what we would consider a lesson plan if you've ever taught a class, right? That's how the class moves. So the steps in how to achieve that. This can include how many tables you've used, how those tables, anything like that. The curriculum outcomes, and then a pre-assessment if you have one. But basically, we're wanting to know how you're going to assess it. In my community, assessment has looked like bell ringers a lot for me. So write me 3 things you learned or answer these 3 quick questions. And then the incentive for doing that for me would be you're entering into a raffle to win something just for showing up and completing your bell ringer. And then that bottom part is the post-assessment. So did this event meet the learning outcome? Yes or no, why or why not? What can be done differently? What are your recommendations for adaptability? Things like that, things you wish you would have done. And did your assessment plan work? So we realized early on that when we were assessing, we were not necessarily assessing well. So really working to figure out how can we figure out if the program was successful and educational. How can we get that information without assessing our residents to death, frankly? So during the first year, these were primarily geared to assist the hall directors in the practice of asking the question, how did or did not, how was it effective for our community? How do I know this? Things like that. We are not asking our RAs to fill this out currently, although that is a plan for the future. The goal this year was to really just get the hall directors comfortable in conducting this purposeful data-driven work that meets the needs of the residents that they work with on a daily basis. So the goal was not to create a structure that was stifling. So we did not want to go in year 1 with a full list of these are the programs you're going to do. You have no autonomy to make this work for your residence hall. That was not what we were trying to do. So by putting this work back on the hall directors, we were able to really uniquely meet the needs of our residents. And there was still opportunity for collaboration. So Anthony just held a Sex in the Dark program. My community is going to have a Sex in the Dark program in a few weeks. We're sitting down figuring out what worked, what didn't, what can I change? I work in an all-female residence hall. How is that going to look different for me than it did for him in a new construction co-ed residence hall? So that collaboration is still there, but the structure is not stifling. And then the goal ultimately is to have all of these lesson plans put into a centralized hub so that we can go in and pull those ideas on our own and say, okay, I recognize that someone else on campus has done a sexual health program. I myself need to do a sexual health program. Let me go see what they've done. Let me go see who they use. Let me go see how they assess this program. And then just let me re-implement it in my building with the changes that they've recommended. So hopefully one day we will have a really robust set of educational lesson plans that we can utilize to make our programming easier, streamlined, and that we know it's something that's going to be successful. At this point, we have that hub created, and we're to the point where we're asking our hall directors, hey, make sure you have this filled out and then send it to us. And then send us your flyer, and then send us your assessment tools and any handouts you use. And we're creating folders for those things to where we can keep it organized and make it really easy for other people to go back and look at that work. So that's where we're currently at with this. As we were working toward moving from a programming model to a residential curriculum, the idea of sequential learning came up a lot. So this on your right is somewhat of a calendar, right? But not your stereotypical RA calendar, maybe. So this is our first couple weeks. So you can see week 1, week 2, this was the fall semester, and the sequential learning is mapped out here. So the first strategy, bulletin boards, those passive programs, and those first floor meetings that have a lesson planned with them. Moving straight into that, at the end of that, it was booked in by a roommate discussion. We wanted those roommates to start having those conversations that we knew they were going to have if they needed a roommate mediation. Once they're comfortable talking to the roommate, we move straight into community standards for their floor and for their hall. This was really important for me in 2 traditional buildings. By traditional, I mean the bathrooms at the end of the hallway. They're sharing with 20 of their closest friends. Really important for us to set those community standards and create that sense of personal responsibility and inclusive residential community. Then the very next strategy would be that hall newsletter. We're sending out reminders. We're helping them connect to their academic partners. Then we're going to do a social program. We want to bring it back to them. Then it's the end of August, the beginning of September. We're going to hit them with another passive bulletin board. And then we're going to engage them on our campus community by a football game, right? And then we're going to start doing educational programs, because at that point, our RAs have been sociogramming the entire time. So by week 2 or 3, they're going to start seeing those needs happen. So obviously, I'm not going to read all of this to you. Hopefully, this sequential learning map is making some sense now that I've went through the first couple of lines. But the goal was to be really intentional about when we were giving information to students. We did not do intentional interactions with every resident at this point this year, but it was important to us to still have that in place. So by week 5, we were seeing who was not being engaged with. We were sending our RAs saying, hey, go ask them this, go have these conversations. So this mapping took all of our passive programs, our social programs, our educational programs, sociogramming, residents of interest, intentional interactions, everything that we had ever done or wanted to do was put in this sequence to make the learning happen throughout and make it a little easier to understand as a hall director. So we wanted to align our outcomes through the time so that those built upon each other, and we kept that learning going, and it never felt like we were taking a step back. And the goal is to continue to evolve, right? And figure out how our returning students really fit into this. And this is a great example of how it's pretty easy for them to fit into this, because at the beginning, we have to do these things. We have to set those foundations. But we are currently working to figure out how we evolve this to really fit the students who keep returning to our residence halls, and how this would fit with our P3. So we have a private-public partnership it's called College View. And how does this learning fit in there, where residents' education looks different? So that's what we're currently working on. So some highs and lows with setting the culture. I alluded to this a little earlier in the presentation, but no change is ever without some highs and lows and moments of growth and moments of why did we do this, right? So we've learned a lot. Some of our highs, we now have data-driven student intervention. When a student submits a resident of interest form, if an RA submits that to me, I instantly know what's going on with that student, and I can step in and intervene as I need to make sure that we're getting that student back from the margin. We've created new opportunities for divisional and academic partnerships. We have hopefully began this transition to allowing our campus partners the opportunity to see that education happens in the residence halls. They're not going to class 15 hours a week, coming back to their residence hall rooms and not learning anything. That's not what's happening. We've put increased attention onto the curricular approach, and we've really made it a department-wide thing to get on board with this. The lows, COVID. Like I said, I think if we'd had a crystal ball, we may not have decided to do this during the middle of a pandemic, but it has created a lot of challenges with this asterisk year. We've tried to figure out how to gain the how beyond just the why. So we now recognize why things happen, but not necessarily how. And then simplifying the A word has been really tough. Assessment has been quite the dirty word. It scares people. I recognize that, but we've really worked to make it to where we can put it in our language every day and recognize that assessment's not always reinventing the wheel. Assessment does not always have to be hard. Assessment is part of what we do to make sure that we're growing and evolving and serving our residents as we need to. We definitely did struggle. We struggled to broaden the understanding of the language, deadline versus guideline, prompts versus checkpoints. We had a really riveting discussion on the difference between a floor and a wing. If you want to know more about that, you just let us know. We discovered a lot of barriers to community building. Perhaps the most difficult one was recognizing student staff's ability to execute programming rooted in education, which is why this model has allowed for our hall directors, so our GRDs and our CDs, to oversee that educational programming. There are pros and cons to this, right? We failed to recognize that everyone might not be equipped to implement a full curricular approach. So that's now meant that we need to go back and say, okay, where in this did you stray? Where can we pull you back in and make sure that you're equipped to do this? We have had to work hard to create a strong stakeholder involvement in our curricular development, not only creating buy-in from our students and graduate staff, but helping those external partners that we so want to utilize, understanding the shift behind this and how that can influence the work that we're doing with them, hopefully for the better. Student staff buy-in was difficult, especially for our returning staff. They came in August saying, where's the dog model? And they were still trying to fit their programs into that programming model. So releasing them of the responsibility of having to hit those components of the dog model and just saying, we're looking for a social program. We're looking for you to just have fun with your residents. That was difficult for some of our returning RAs to understand, but I would say that that went well. Transitioning that did go well, and we're trying to figure out where they fit into that education piece now too. There were definitely some growing pains. We lost people that fueled the process throughout. So as we were starting to plan this, not last fall, but the fall before, we had a team and some of those people have left. And how do you continue the trajectory knowing that you've lost the people that have done that work? And then also adding new people in to continue to enhance that work and continue to get them on board. That was a growing pain, but ultimately has led to some great conclusions. Reflecting on Brown 2020, we definitely took a deep dive. We were in the 12-foot end of the pool, diving board. When we were developing and rolling this out, we definitely took that if not now, then when approach. I can definitely say that I contributed to let's just do it. Like we're here, let's do it. No time is ever perfect. The timing is never great for any of these changes to happen. But we definitely learned even more about how to navigate large-scale changes in curriculum because of when we rolled this out.
So Stephanie touched on quite a few of things that we're doing to continue moving forward and setting the culture. And so we are moving forward to continue implementing sequential learning, to make sure we are making sure that as we are implementing our strategies that are building upon each other. Stephanie talked a lot about assessment stuff, so we're trying to still improve our assessment strategies. As we're improving our assessment strategies, we want to also make sure we are looking at all the variables. We have made a lot of changes in our department, and so sometimes it's a challenge, like, is it not working because of this change we made, or a different change? Is it because of COVID? Is it because of the election? So helping to determine those confounding variables to make sure, though, that our assessments are clean and can really give us feedback on what we're doing. Stephanie also touched a lot on our campus partners, as well as creating buy-in. But one thing that we are trying to continue to do is making sure we're identifying challenges, continuously seeing what isn't working, and then what trajectory can we take to address those challenges to make sure we are continuing to improve our curriculum, both the content and the implementation. And as well as we're moving forward, we want to make sure we are maintaining communications and peer review processes with some of our external partners. We have been partnering with some universities, including the University of Alabama at Birmingham, the University of South Carolina, and the University of South Florida, as we talk about our residential curriculum. So we're still trying to make steps to move forward to really make sure our residential curriculum is improving, because we want to make sure our on-campus residents are really making the most of their experience living on campus. And that is the conclusion of our presentation. We don't have much time left. If you do have any questions, you can feel free to email Isaac or myself. Isaac has been the leader on the implementation and the creation of our residential curriculum, and he'd be more than happy to have some conversations with you about our curriculum.